Hey, thanks for calling.
Thanks for having me. So my question has to do with the Church Fathers, and I apologize, Jimmy, if you covered this topic in your book. I've been meaning to read it. It's on my very long list of books to read as I, try and uncover answers to my many questions and make my way back to the church because I left for a while. But I have a couple of friends in particular that say that the earliest Church Fathers were all pacifists, and that pacifism was, the way of the early church, and that it really wasn't until innovation crept into the teaching and Augustine's just war theory stuck on that the church sort of, changed her views. So if you could clear that up, it'd be great.
Yeah, there are a few things I'd say, and no, this isn't something I deal with in my book, The Fathers Know Best, but there is a lot of good stuff there. In terms of this question, it's true that prior to the legalization of Christianity in the early 300s, pacifism was a very popular view, and there have been various studies of that done. For example, I know one was done by a Protestant scholar named Roland Bainton, Bainton, and I'd have to go back and look into the subject more closely to have a fully formed view of my own. I strongly suspect, though, that anyone who's claiming that there was absolute unanimity is skating on really thin ice, and for several reasons. One is that that there is evidence in the New Testament that you didn't have to be a pacifist in order to be a Christian. You look, for example, at John the Baptist's dialogue with the soldiers who came to him. He's been preaching the need for repentance, and they come to him and say, "What should we do?" And this is in Luke's gospel, by the way. And he tells them to be content with their pay. He does not tell them, "Quit your jobs." So he doesn't see incompatibility between repenting and turning to God and being willing under the right circumstances to use violence. Similarly, Jesus heals the centurion's servant without rebuking the centurion for being a military man. Instead, he praises him for having greater faith than he's found elsewhere. And so that would be another indication. We also have St. Paul in Romans 13 talking about how the rulers, the secular authorities, don't bear the sword for nothing. And they are ministers of God's justice. And so the power of the sword is used to administer God's justice. And of course, you don't just spank people with swords. You use them as actual acts of violence. So we have evidence in the New Testament of an acceptance of the idea of the use of violence in appropriate circumstances. Given that, it's hard for me to imagine that this just died out. Now, it may be true in a particular quarter century or something, or a particular half century. We don't have witnesses where we can prove that they accepted the use of violence as legitimate defense, but we have such fragmentary evidence in the first few centuries that so many voices have been lost that you really can't draw any firm conclusions. And so even if pacifism was popular during a particular phase of church history where Christianity was illegal and therefore was not responsible for running and defending a state, you really can't draw too much of a conclusion from that. Also, Christianity spread rapidly among the military. If you look from the first century onward, you have a rapid growth of the Christian faith in the military in the empire, and that would itself be a signal that not all Christians were pacifists. So when you then have Christianity legalized and it becomes very popular and eventually it becomes the state religion, suddenly Christians are being forced by their new circumstances to grapple with the question of, are there legitimate situations in which force can be used as legitimate defense? They have to grapple with that in a new way because now they're responsible for keeping the peace and defending from external enemies and so forth, like in any state. And the truth is, no state can exist for very long if it's not willing to defend itself. And so Augustine helped further doctrinal development by proposing just war theory, but the seeds of it were already there. It's just the times forced that doctrine to receive further consideration and further scrutiny, and people had to sober themselves and reconcile themselves to the fact that now that we're responsible for keeping the peace, we have to be willing to do this when called upon.
Yeah. JJ,